Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq. Joining me at the market site in Times Square, New York City, we have Bill Cappuzzi. He's the CEO of Apex Clearing. We're going to take a look at the fourth quarter Millennial 100 Stock Pulse report. And guess what? Their top 5 stock picks are Nasdaq 100 listed companies. Bill, it's great to have you on with us.
Thanks for having me.
This is a really interesting report. I love reading on Millennial and even Gen Z trends because that's really where the next consumer base, whether we're looking at the economy or the stock market, is coming from. Tell us more about this Pulse report.
Yeah, so first it's, who is Apex? Apex is a custodian, right? And effectively what we do is we hold the assets of millions of end consumers, roughly 8.5 million customers on Apex's books. And in particular, what we focus on is fintech customers, fintech companies and then their customers. And so not surprising, we have a large percentage of our customers are in the Gen X, Millennial, and then Gen Z, as you said. Specific to this, there's roughly 750,000 people. And the way that the index, what it looks at is the top 100 names by holding, not in terms of the size, but of those 750,000 people, let's look at the number of times someone owns Amazon, the number of times someone owns Netflix. So it's not a function of how large the stock is or if it's going up or down. It's just a function of, do you hold a stock across those 750,000 people?
Why do you think the financial services industry, they have to keep a pulse on what Millennials, X, and Z are doing?
Well, look, because if you buy into a lot of the news around this great wealth transfer that's going to happen over the next 20, 30 years, baby boomers are going to die. That wealth is going to transfer to Gen X, but more realistically to Millennials, the Gen Zs. And you know, the stats are somewhere between 30 and 60 trillion dollars is going to move. And you know, I think the second part of the stat is, you know, they're not going to move to their parents, their grandparents, or advisor. They're not going to stay with that person. They're going to find their own path, and that's why it's really interesting. There's going to be a lot of money in play.
There's some trends that have shifted over the past year. Tell us about that.
Yeah, look, one is just access to markets, right? I think with companies like Stash, SoFi, Robinhood, MoneyLion, they're providing access to the market, and it continues to get better, right? So everyone lives, you have your iPad in your hand, everyone lives on a mobile device. For sure, the generation Millennials, Gen Zs, for sure live on their phones. The second is we've seen zero commission over the course of the last 6 months. This is not a new phenomenon, right? Robinhood was a client of ours. We spawned zero commission a number of years ago together as a partnership, and it's just made it easier for people to access the markets today versus where it was years ago.
It's certainly democratized, that's for sure. And let's talk about some of those picks. And I mentioned the top 5 being Nasdaq 100 companies. Of course, your Apple, your Amazon, your Netflix, your Alphabet. What's interesting to me is those really are the drivers of the new economy. They're not looking as much at energy or manufacturing names, but they're going with names that they know.
Yeah. So this is Peter Lynch, right? Peter Lynch is saying years ago was invest in what you know. And I think that the slant on that, the twist on that is, millennials are investing in what they believe in, and frankly, what they use. If you look at the names on our Millennial 100 list, many of them are products that they use or they buy into or they believe in as a generation.
I also noticed there's a lot of fintech names in there as well. Visa, MasterCard. That shows you just how savvy they are and understand those applications. It's also streaming wars were brought up.
Yeah. So this is the Baby Yoda effect. I think what's interesting, if you look at the top 100 or top 10, for the first time since we started this index a number of years ago, Disney has moved ahead of Netflix, right? And we call that the Baby Yoda effect. Day one when they launched their streaming, Disney launched their streaming services, they picked up 10 million users on that service. And if you look at the top 10, there's quite a few that now have streaming services. And again, back to the point about the iPad in the hands or the iPhone in the hands, people want access to information real time, on the go.
It's going to be really curious to see what the first quarter looks like when that's released, because as you and I were talking about before off air, there's a generation of investors, of traders, of advisors that have not seen a prolonged volatile move in the market. I mean, granted, so we're here on February 25th, so about 3 or 4 days we've seen some volatility in the market.
Yeah.
Over the past 10 years, for the most part, they've been very small, isolated events. So I'm going to be curious to see how they manage that.
Yeah, we'll see. You know, we've seen a few of these blips, right? We've been doing this for years, and we've seen a couple of these events like what's happening today and yesterday. And surprising to me, there wasn't that hysteria, right, from the millennial investor to get out. As a matter of fact, what we have often seen in the past historically is people actually buying into these events. We'll see whether or not this is prolonged.
Yeah.
Right, let's just say this goes on and it's a 10% correction. Then what happens? We haven't seen that in quite a long time. But when you have these small corrections, what we found is people actually buying into the dips.
Well, because they do have, it's more democratized now. It's not, you just have to go to your advisor to get that kind
free.
of advice. It's free and it's readily accessible to you.
Yeah.
All right, Bill, thanks so much for joining us
Thanks
at
so much.
MarketSite. And thank you for joining me on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.